I feel like if I trusted my gut when I first thought something is wrong, the first day he came to get her. This video is a hard one for me to make, but I feel like it could be one of the most important videos that I'll ever make, but I'm not sure if I'm ever even going to post it. I actually already made it once, but I know more now than I knew then. So I'm just going to start. We are homeschooling Maggie this year, although homeschooling for us doesn't really look like it does for probably most people, in that she goes to therapy from 9 to 3:30 every day. She loves her therapy center. We have been involved with this therapy center since she was 3 years old. For the first 2 years, they were in our home every single day, and they're wonderful. They're really, really wonderful people. Maggie is really close to her therapist. And today when I dropped her off, she was saying, "See you later, see you later." And I kept saying, "I have to wait for your person, Maggie. I'm not gonna just leave you here." She's like, "See you later, see you later." She said it like 6 times. I mean, she was ready to push me out the door. She was so excited to be there and for me to leave and for her to go and do her thing. So I just feel really good when I leave her there. Officially, we're homeschooling, and I'm working with her on school stuff when she's not there, and I feel like it's the best thing for her and the best thing for our family. But what I'm talking about today isn't exactly going to be homeschooling. What I want to talk about today is, as a parent of a child with special needs, it's really important to understand that behavior is communication. When that child has communication difficulties or major blockages to communication that can prevent them from telling you what's going on when they're away from you. I believe that listening to that communication as well as you can, and also trusting your instincts as a parent, is extremely important. And that is what we are talking about today. And so I am going to tell you a story. It does have to do with why we're homeschooling this year, although it's not entirely why. If this had never happened, I'm not sure we would be homeschooling. And it starts 2 years ago. And it starts when 2 years ago in spring, Maggie got a new bus driver, and she started having panic attacks every day before she went to school. Before this, she loved going to school. She was happy. She would ask about it constantly. She giggled and skipped outside, and it was perfect. And then her bus driver went on maternity leave and then ultimately didn't come back. She got a series of subs that none of them were really great. I mean, one of them even let her run around the bus while it was driving home on the highway. And so it was hard. And then finally she got her permanent driver, and we were just so relieved for her to have a permanent driver. We really wanted it to work. But then the permanent driver came along, and she started having like this anxiety that was like nothing we'd ever seen before. We started seeing these behaviors, and the behaviors were not behaviors we'd ever seen before. They were bad. I mean, they were intense. They were scary for us. I mean, whatever was going on, it had to be scary for her. She was hurting herself. We were scared for her. We were scared for the other kids. It was a scary situation for everyone. She was acting out at school. She was acting out at home. And it seemed to revolve around her going to school in the morning. And the bus was late a lot. He would be anywhere from half an hour late. He was frequently around half an hour late. When I talked to the school, they thought that it was likely because Maggie was very routinized, and that it was just a change in her schedule, that she could tell time, she could tell that he was late. Because I mean, we have to be ready for the bus to get there, and then she has to sit and wait and wait and wait, and he's not there yet. And that was why she was freaking out. She was freaking out over waiting. And that felt weird to me, because before this, she hadn't really been super routinized around us, at least. Like, I felt like our lives were actually pretty flexible. Like, suddenly they were really routinized. Suddenly everything had to be exactly the same. She was having all these OCD things where she had to touch things over and over again in a certain order. But before this, our lives weren't like that. We weren't like stuck in this little bubble of everything has to be exactly the same. Like, now it's like that, but it wasn't before. And why is it like that? But everyone said it was routinization. And so I said, okay. And then there was a day where she went to therapy, and one of her behavioral technicians said to Paul that she just had a really bad feeling about the bus driver when he dropped her off. And so we mentioned, I immediately, and that her socks were soaking wet, and she didn't have a good feeling. And so I wrote an email to the teacher, and one of the people from the school district immediately went over the next day, I think, to the school bus to the school bus company, and they asked if I wanted them to watch the videos from that day, and they did. And Maggie had melted down. Her socks, I guess, were wet from playing outside, and it was totally fine. He was great with her. He was fine with her. Nothing happened. And after that, I felt horrible. I felt like I'd accused him of doing something horrible because I had all these suspicions, and it had been confirmed that he was wonderful, that he was being kind to her, that he was saying calm down while he was driving, and that nothing had happened. And so after that, I really gave him the benefit of the doubt. But her freakouts kept happening. I just thought, this is how it is now, these behaviors. This is how it is. She just wants her schedule to be exactly the same. This is life now, and this is just a new phase of life. And these behaviors are life for us. And I had this feeling in my gut, like every day when he came, I didn't like sending her with him. And I mean, we'd had so many bus drivers, and this was the only time I felt this way. But I also had like this reassurance now. He'd been kind to her on the videotape on this one day for 15 minutes when he was with her and other kids. And to be clear, he drove with her every day from our house up to school for like 30 miles, and they were alone. So this goes on. And then he crashed the bus into our car. And our car was on the street, and he crashed the bus into our car and kept going, which was whatever, fine. I don't really care about our old cars. Paul called, it was his car, Paul called, and I'm like fidgeting with everything. I'm sorry, I fidget all the time, just like my girls. Paul called, and he told the school bus company, and they were like, okay, prove it. And he sent them pictures of the yellow paint down the side of his car, and they didn't respond. And it was like, okay. And then 2 days later, he crashed the bus again with Maggie on it at the school into another car in front of the school. And honestly, all I could feel was relief. I was so relieved that I thought, he's crashed the bus twice in 1 week. Surely he will not be a bus driver anymore. Like, how many things can you do and still be a bus driver? A lot. You can do a lot of things and still be a bus driver. Yeah. He was still a bus driver. He is still a bus driver. But he wasn't her bus driver. After that, they pulled him off of her route. And I was relieved. I felt immensely relieved. And she got a new bus driver, and the new bus driver was on time, and she, within a month, all these behaviors were just gone. She wasn't doing these things. She wasn't ramming her head into the wall anymore. She wasn't hurting herself. She wasn't hurting other people. It was like our lives were slowly coming back. Not totally. All the OCD behaviors, they were still there, but we were getting our lives back. And it was still really scary, but then one day, this new bus driver was half an hour late. And Maggie and I went, and we sat outside on the porch waiting for the bus. And we sat outside and sat outside and sat outside. And I kept waiting for that explosion, for her to start hitting her head against things and screaming and freaking out. And it never came. And the bus finally pulled up, and she got up and she skipped out to the bus holding my hand and got on the bus giggling and smiling, and they pulled away. And I just stood there like about to cry, because in that moment I knew that it wasn't routinization. I knew that it was him. And I went to the therapy center that she went to, and I said that to one of her therapists, and one of the therapists said, actually, there was a day a while back when he was there, and it was a different therapist had been there, and he was being so rough with her that she said to take his hands off of her, and he had turned around and said, F you, and picked her up and threw her back on the bus and into her seat. It was because he had accidentally gotten her off, and she wasn't supposed to get off, so he picked her up and was being really, really rough. And there was a BCBA there that tried to stop him from how he was being with her, and he cussed her out. And at that point, I called Paul, and Paul went straight to the sheriff's office and told the sheriff. Because we felt at that point we had an adult witness to him having his hands on her in a way that they told him to stop, and he had cussed them out. Now we know something actually happened, someone saw. And this whole time she's saying to me, tummy leg hurt, tummy leg hurt, tummy leg hurt, tummy leg hurt. And I thought she was just telling me she had a stomach ache. Do you have a stomach ache? Communication is so hard. Sadie's had stomach aches just because she's anxious for years, and we've tried everything and nothing helps. So Maggie says things sometimes and they don't always make sense. And when I would ask her more questions, I just didn't understand yet. Let's keep going. My husband went to the sheriff's, and I guess the sheriff came and they interviewed people at the therapy center, and then they went and interviewed him. And he didn't deny anything. He told them they'd have to get a warrant for the tapes. It turned out the tapes had all been deleted because of the amount of time that had passed since he'd been her bus driver. When they asked him, was there anything they'd see on the tapes, he'd said, you'd better get a warrant. They asked if he'd done anything to her, and he said, why would I do anything to her when I have a wife? The sheriff's deputy said that he went in expecting him to deny it and expecting to feel better, and that afterwards he felt worse. And that was really alarming for us as a parent. And then Maggie started saying more and more things to us. She started scripting things like, don't tell. And Maggie only scripts things that adults say. I've never heard her script anything that her brothers and sisters have said. So that was extremely disturbing, because I knew she wasn't hearing don't tell in her classroom. I trusted her class. I trusted her teachers. I trusted her therapists. There was this one person that she's freaking out with. I knew where not to trust. And I was also feeling a lot of anger because I felt like I'd been talked out of that initial instinct of not trusting, that I believed it was routinization. And it was really hard not to be angry because of some of the behaviors. They were really concerned, and they brought in a detective, and the detective asked me why we'd waited, and I explained the whole entire thing. Like, the reason that we didn't do it right away was because I believed it was routinization, but then she'd started saying these other things and doing these other things, and now I'm freaking out and losing my mind, and I'm terrified. And the detective came in and told me that basically she would only be able to make a case in front of a jury if there was physical evidence, or if Maggie could tell a jury what had happened to her. And so she went in and she tried to interview Maggie, because we figured it wouldn't upset Maggie to talk to a police officer. This is a female detective, and Maggie was at the time talking about how she wanted to be a police officer when she grew up. If you asked her, what do you want to be when you grow up, she would say police officer or policeman. So I thought Maggie would probably be pretty happy about a policeman coming to see her. So the detective went to her school and sat down with her, and then called me and said that she believed that something had happened, but that she didn't believe that she could make that case before a jury, and so that maybe someday when Maggie was more verbal, something could be done, but that at this point in time she couldn't do anything. And that was where things stood at the end of the school year. And then we went to her doctor's appointment, and I told her doctor everything, and her doctor was like, her doctor, I've already said, is brilliant, really good about everything autism. She was like, no, we aren't just doing nothing about this. We aren't just giving up because the sheriff's department said no. And she said, I'm calling CPS. And so she put in a call to CPS, and she also made a referral to a forensic doctor, who I actually knew because the forensic doctor also worked in the PQ that Tessie had been in. CPS referred it to the Michigan State Police, and the Michigan State Police called and talked to me, and then as soon as the Michigan State Police found out that the sheriff's detective had said there was nothing they could do because of her verbal ability, they immediately dropped it. And we never heard from CPS at all. I mean, I guess maybe they looked into what the police did, and then they never talked to me. So the one time you want to talk to CPS as a parent, and you can't, and they just don't come around, I guess. And at one point I did ask her, because she was sitting with me and she was being really talkative, and I thought, you know what, I don't want to ask any leading questions, but if I don't ask her, she's never going to tell me anything. And so I said, Maggie, did anything ever happen on the bus? And she said, tummy, leg hurt. And I said, your tummy and leg hurt? Where's your tummy, leg? And she took my hand and she made a circle like this, which had me terrified. And I mean, I thought a million awful things had happened. And we went to the forensic doctor and we told him everything, and he did a complete exam, which was pretty horrible, and he didn't have any physical findings, but he felt really strongly that the bus driver had probably lost his temper with her and had possibly gotten physical with her, and he thought that that would have probably scared her enough that she would have had the responses that we'd been seeing, all of the responses that we'd been seeing, that if he had been physical with her or even just screaming at her and terrorizing her, that we would have seen the responses that we'd been seeing. And that was, and he said, this man needs to not be working with children, and he put it all in the report, and by the way, he is. Oh, and during this whole time, the bus company also did its own investigation. There was a police officer, a former police officer that was working for them, and he was really, really nice to me the whole entire time. But obviously, he was representing the interests of the bus company, and he looked into it and found that the bus driver had acted inappropriately when he picked her up like that and was rough with her, and they had him retrained. And so that was their side of it. And at the same time, the bus company is calling me for the beginning of the next year, and the women at the company are being super, super snide and saying things like, so is Maggie going to be riding the bus next year? And I said, yeah, can you tell me a pickup time? And they're like, no, we can't. This is like 2 days before school. I mean, so much attitude, so rude, and then just laughter in the background. So I mean, I could tell they thought I was like the worst person in the world who's made all this up, and I'm basically crying all day, every day about this. I don't even know how I vlogged through all of that time when this was going on. So yeah, we didn't know anything for a long time, and I was really scared of what had happened. It's really hard to find therapists for kids that aren't verbal, but one of her old therapists is actually a licensed social worker, and so she actually came to our house and did trauma therapy at our house. And at the same time, Maggie started some medications that also really seemed to help, probably more than anything else. The medications seemed to help. I also started some medications because I was like seriously depressed by the time we were in the midst of all this. It was awful. And then something happened the other day that probably gave us more answers than anything that has happened so far. And that was that James and Maggie were in the basement together. And James is 4.5. And I mean, he has his diagnosis from his neurologist is global developmental delay. He definitely has a little 4-year-old's temper, and like siblings, they got in a fight over something. I think she grabbed his little arm and like shook him, not like in a hard way, but she adores him, and so she grabbed him lightly and like shook his little arm because she was excited about bubble guppies, and he got really, really mad, and he turned around and he hit her a bunch of times. I was upstairs, we'd just gotten home, I was still upstairs with Tessie, and I heard her start crying. Now, Maggie doesn't usually react to pain in a typical way. Like a lot of times she'll laugh, and so to hear her just scream and start sobbing, I ran downstairs, and at the same time I run downstairs to her, and she's curled up in the fetal position and laying on the couch and sobbing. And I look back on the camera to see what happened, and James is immediately like, I'm sorry, it was an accident. I closed my eyes. I didn't know what I was doing. And I look on the camera, and when she grabbed him on the arm, he turned around and hit her like this. And the way little brothers will do. I mean, he's way smaller than her, and he's 4. And so he left the room, and she is curled up in a ball sobbing, and I'm like, it's okay. And she says to me, bus, harness, tummy, leg hurt. Bus, harness, tummy, leg hurt. And is just sobbing, curled up, repeating that. And so I took her over into my bedroom and laid down with her and held her for like an hour while she cried. Now, Maggie hardly ever cries ever when she gets hurt. She gets hurt seriously and she doesn't cry. So for her to have that kind of a response to me makes me think that my immediate thought was, and for her to say those words, the words that we haven't heard her say, tummy, leg hurt, in almost a year, my immediate thought was that it was because whatever was him hitting her like that triggered what had happened last year. And I told her doctor that. We saw her doctor again for her yearly checkup because it's been a year, and I told her doctor that, and her doctor said that she thought that it strongly indicated that that was what had happened, that probably he was hitting her. And it's scary to think that for March, April, and May, that's what she was going through. Last year, I spent the whole entire year. She had a great bus driver. Everyone knew she could never go with the old bus driver if he ever showed up. And actually, the compliance officer from the bus company said, if he ever shows up at your house, call me immediately. Everyone knew that she absolutely couldn't go to him, and I went through this whole last school year trying to feel safe again, and I didn't feel safe, even though we knew her two bus drivers. They were amazing people. I could tell at the beginning of the year they thought I was some sort of a monster, but over the course of the year they started to realize that I wasn't. I actually became friends with both of them, and I kept this story to myself, but I also felt like it was a really important story to share, because I feel like if I trusted my gut when I first thought something is wrong, the first day he came to get her, I felt sick letting her go with him. And every day after that, every time I handed her off to him, I felt sick letting her go with him. And if for one moment I had trusted my gut, everything could have been different, but I didn't. And I know I can't blame myself for that, because she should have been safe. And that's his fault. But at the same time, it definitely taught me as a parent to trust myself more than I did before. By the midpoint of the year, I knew that we were going to be making different choices. We were going to take a year off to evaluate and reevaluate and see how things could be different. That she was just a different kid. She was so stressed out, and that we were going to take a year off, give her more free time, and just see if we could do things differently this year. Give her a break. She's worked so hard. She's done amazing things, but I wanted to have more time to be a kid. I want her away from those memories. I want her to be able to be home in our backyard running around while the sun is still up. Anyways, filming this, it was terrifying. Now you really know the worst thing that's happened to us. I spent most of the second half of 2018 crying just about every day about this. And if you are in a position where a parent shares a concern with you, please don't just disregard it quickly, because most people who work with our kids are amazing and do it for the right reasons, but every once in a while there is a snake out there, or someone who just can't control their temper. We really need to protect our kids that can't communicate what's going on, especially from that sort of person. That is it for today. If you like this video, I would appreciate it if you'd give it a thumbs up. And if you're interested in all things autism, we'd love it if you'd hit subscribe. And I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.